Hey guys, once again. That's right, we're back. Week 2, second episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the Final Fantasy franchise and the legacy it's left behind. And with me this week, and as always, it's a grave honor.
Hello. And we'll see, I guess, how much we can nerd out to specific titles.
Yeah, we could definitely nerd out. If I was going to nerd out to a title, it's going to be Final Fantasy stuff. So, before we get into that, we'll recap last week's episode. We talked about games that got um, bad reviews that didn't deserve it, specifically Little Dragon's Cafe. So if you missed it, you can always go back and check that one out. It's uploaded on our YouTube. But also, speaking of that, things that get bad reviews and the actual product not being that, you just recently went and saw the movie Venom, correct?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Okay. Well, a lot of people really ragged on that movie, but you said being as an outsider type to that movie, you found it kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty fun.
Okay. So essentially, just never go by the reviews. Go check something out for yourself, and more than likely, you'll enjoy it a lot better than whoever reviewed it.
Apparently. I'm not sure if any critics can really be trusted except to maybe make people go see it because they're like, oh, it can't be that bad, goes to see it.
Yeah.
And the theater was pretty full. I mean, I know it just came out, I think, on Friday, but um, me and the group that came with me, three other people, we were right in the front. God, I hate that. I mean, my neck.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Solo is another good example. So in the chat, Solo is another good example. Watched it recently and really enjoyed it. And see, that's a thing too. Like it seems like Star Wars fans are really torn um, between the ones that were really hardcore into the originals versus the newer ones versus the even newer ones. And I've seen some hardcore Star Wars fans um, going at it with each other about how bad the new ones are and the story writing and
Mm,
just all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, I guess there's always going to be a reason for people to complain rather than just enjoy a movie and take it for what it is.
yeah. I mean, I can see why it can be hard because both Venom and but Final Fantasy, not Final Fantasy, Star Wars, they have a pretty intense following if they have them, like comic book lovers and people who love Star Wars for the longest time. I can see why they would have trouble because it's something they've loved for a long time and some changes might not really make it fun, I suppose. Like perhaps story loopholes or trying to like dumb it down because they want more money overall instead of just, appeasing to their original following, which I guess could argue that that was the problem with what people could have with Venom. I don't know anything about the comic books. I don't read comics, so I feel like I could be wasted on me. And some of the stuff they said for humor I thought was funny, but I'm not sure if it was very Venom like. And if I had to try and critique it just from a general standpoint of a movie, the main flaw I thought in with Venom was that Venom, I guess, is like an anti-hero, I've been told, so he's not really good or bad, just kind of wants to do whatever. But he kind of went to Eddie's the host's side pretty quickly, just because he saw a nice view on top of a skyscraper. So I mean, I know the movies are limited time, but I think they could have used just a tad bit more.
Okay.
I can only assume that Venom just got an attachment to Earth food
Yeah, well,
because he started to like it.
when you talk about hardcore fans that hate
And also some quotes.
some quotes.
I mean, certain things that they try and use for humor, I guess, could like hurt people internally for an exaggeration. Like, I think one thing Venom said near the last part is like, "I will bite your head, your legs, and your arms." Also, it would be like a headless, armless, legless torso rolling about the street like a turd in the wind.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay. Well, when you talk about fans of original stuff that gets remade, um, you're definitely going to be divided. I was divided with the Ghostbusters reboot, but we don't have enough time for me to even get into the Ninja Turtles with all the different remakes and reboots and Michael Bay and yeah. So we won't get into that. But what we will talk about is there is a game coming out. I know the release date is still to be determined, but they are doing a complete overhaul remake of Final Fantasy VII. From what I saw, it's not even really the same game. It's not like okay, they did an HD remake. I mean, this is basically a whole new engine, and it's from the ground up. So I don't know how I'm gonna feel about it. But Final Fantasy VII was the game that pretty much was the only game that I got into that was not like a sports game or a fighting game or whatever back in the day. Um, I had a roommate who had a PlayStation, and every day I would come home from work, and it was my TV. Okay, I had a TV in the living room, and he had his PlayStation hooked up to it. And every day I'd come home, and this dude was just playing Final Fantasy VII. He would be playing it when I left to go to work. He'd be playing it when I came back from work. It was just, I came in one day and I said, man,
Did you ever go to the bathroom?
yeah. Well, I was like, God, man, how can you play one game for so long? And he was like, I don't know. I can't explain it. You would have to play it to know. And I was like, I'm watching him just kind of run around in circles and he's fighting the same enemies over and over again, kind of, grinding things. And I was like, man, this just looks boring and repetitive. Like, watching it is kind of boring. Now, granted, I caught it in mid game, so I had no idea what he was trying to do or accomplish. But um, I decided one day, I said, you know what, I'm gonna try it. I'm I've been played all these other games and I'm just kind of bored looking for something new. So I pop in Final Fantasy VII, and again, for me, this is not like the typical kind of game that I would play. And I don't know, right off the bat, like the story, the way that it was very very innovative. Like I had played a couple of RPGs before, typical turn based, and those were kind of 2D and just you got an enemy on one side and your character on the other side, and it's just random hit points and whatnot. And so this was really different because it took like this 3D approach, and you had this huge story, and at the time it was like unheard of. This thing expanded. It was spread out over like 3 or 4 discs, so this was a very long, intense game.
And
So
in general, this all this different mechanics and how it works sounds like it could have been possibly overwhelming for you when you mainly only played sports games at the time, right?
yeah, I mean, I played some like older RPGs and side scrollers and beat 'em up games and stuff, but this was definitely like just completely different. And uh, early on, when you first start getting into being able to summon, and you can call down Ifrit and Shiva, and it was these massive cutscenes kind of things. Like they didn't cut away from the game, but it was like the in-game engine, and all of a sudden, Ifrit would explode up out of the ground and take off into the air and land, and he's sitting there and he's breathing, he's got these huge horns, and he's just this massive character on the screen. And then he goes charging at him, and it leaves this explosion. It visually stunning. I mean, at the time, like you'd never seen anything like this before. And the more I played it, of course, the more I kept wanting to see what else could happen. Like, what else could you do in this game? And there literally was so much that at the time, the internet wasn't really a big thing. You had like the old dial-up AOL. I know I'm dating myself here, but you had like the old dial.
We did too when I was little. I
Yes,
remember that noise of waiting for it to connect.
yeah. So going online to figure out how to do something wasn't an option. So You literally had to go buy these strategy guides that were almost like a third of the cost of the game. It was like another $20, $25. And I ended up doing that. Even though at this time I did not even own the game, I was playing somebody else's. I went out and bought a strategy guide for it. I said, well, worst case scenario, it's got some great artwork in it. So I at least get that out of it. And I think it even had like a poster in the middle that you could pull out and hang up on the wall. But anyway, so there was so much more than just playing this game. It had all these like side quests, and it had um, chocobo racing and chocobo breeding, and yeah, like you say in the chat, they love the feeling of getting a strategy guide for a big RPG, and that's man, I never felt worth it more than when I bought one of those because they were thick. They weren't like the little thin strategy guides that basically just say, hey, if you don't know how to jump, duck, and dodge things, GG. So this was like huge, and it told you how to get every weapon, how to do every side quest, how to get every summons. So there was just so much to do in the game, and I think that's part of the reason why a lot of newer games underwhelm me. Is because I went into this one with such low expectations that it was actually mind blowing just how much stuff you could do, and it was almost that open world feeling because you could stop the main story and go do these side quests or hunt for things or just grind or whatever.
Before open world was labeled on like everything to get people's attention.
Right. This wasn't it wasn't even advertised as open world. It was just there were no words for this game, and you instantly like you connect with the characters. And this game had a lot of highs and lows. I don't think I'm going to be putting out any spoilers because the game came out in freaking 1997. So I hopefully you've played it by now. So at the end of the first disc,
Could just say, well, if you don't want to hear spoilers, well, I guess you're gonna have to hear no evil.
that too. If you don't want to hear any spoilers, don't leave the stream. Just mute it for a second. And but no, the thing is like at the end of the first disc was the first time in one of these games that I ever saw where a main character in your party dies, and I mean dies.
I think everyone really knows about that though because internet.
Sure. And anybody who saw me doing my stream, which all 14 of you or whatever, that saw me doing my stream or watched my YouTube or watched anybody's, um, it was like I remember when I was playing the game for the first time, and I said, "She's not dead. There's no way she's dead. She comes back later, or it's one of those things where you strike her down."
Gotcha.
Yeah, you strike her down, and she comes back in a different form, and stronger, or she's a summon or something. There had to be because they, what they did was in that whole first disc, they kind of tease you along with kind of almost making her a love interest. So you kind of like even though she's not technically your love interest, that you do go on a date with her and all this kind of stuff, and she's very mysterious, and you've done all this stuff to protect her, and then she dies, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't prevent this, and so emotionally on this game, like it just took you in all different directions. And by the end of it, by the end of the game, when I finally beat that game, like I felt like I had lived this character's story. I felt like for however long I played it, 9, 10 months worth, like I was Cloud Strife. I literally felt that. I felt every agonizing bit of pain that he felt in that game. It's probably one of the reasons why I have clinical depression.
Oh.
He's just that game just latched on. So it it was amazing. And again, that came out for the PlayStation. I did end up going out buying a PlayStation just for that game, but then it also a year later came out for PC. And I was in a store in the mall, when I saw it on PC for 19.99, which I thought was a great deal at the time because I think it was still $30 or $40 on PlayStation, but people just weren't buying PC games like that back then. So um, I bought it because one, it came in the coolest box. It was like an odd shaped box. It had nice art. It like had Velcro thing that you unfold, and it was just really neat. And I won't say that it looked much better than the actual PlayStation version, but it did look a lot smoother. And of course, they've remade that for Steam a couple times, and it's, they've gotten it about as good as it can look without redoing all this stuff. So now the thing is there was this massive game. It was a huge hit, and it literally changed people like myself who didn't really play those kind of games. Now they have this new audience. So how do you follow it up? How do you follow up the epicness of Final Fantasy VII? And their answer was Final Fantasy VIII. Now, if you haven't played Final Fantasy VIII, this is one of the ones where the bad reviews might keep you away from a game. I personally...
Is that the one with Titus in it?
No, that's Final Fantasy X.
Oh, okay.
So...
Because all this Final Fantasy stuff is more your ballpark. I don't know about the Black Cat spin-off series, really.
Well, see, Final Fantasy VIII tried to introduce something new. In fact, a couple of things. They had a card system with where you could have a spell, or not a spell, but an ability attached to one of your summons that would turn monsters into random cards. And then you would use these cards to battle other random NPCs in the game and get rare cards. It essentially kind of was almost like the actual card game for Pokemon. It was like...
They kind of fit in a deck building game.
Yeah, they put in this deck building game, and it was kind of hit or miss with the people who played these games. I personally liked it. Another thing they had was they did away with mana. So you didn't have to worry about mana for your magic and casting. You stocked spells. So basically you would have these draw points where you could go to and you would draw spells out and you would store them. And I think you could hold up to like 99 at a time. So you could cast it. If you had 99 of them, you could cast it 99 times. It didn't take any MP. It just, as long as you had the spell, you could use it. And when it ran out, that was it. You had to find other draw points, or you could draw them from the enemies, and certain spells and certain summons could only be taken from the enemies. So there's certain bosses that the only way to get all the summons in the game would be to draw that. Actually, in that game, they weren't called summons. They were called Guardian Forces, GFs. So the only way to get those GFs would be to draw them from a boss. Like certain bosses had certain GFs, and if you didn't know that, and you just went ahead and defeated that boss, that was your only chance to get that GF. So, I won't spend too much time on Final Fantasy VIII, but I will say that was the introduction of the Gunblade, which, yes, the main character was Squall, and
Yes.
he had a gunblade.
I thought he was the coolest ever since I saw him in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, and so, in all honesty, like, he had a sword that had a trigger on it, so that you could time it when you hit. If you hit the trigger button, it would also fire a shot off. So you'd be hitting them with a sword and shooting them at the same time, and it would do more damage. And I thought that was fairly unique, and I really liked the characters in that game. But it was definitely different from Final Fantasy VII. It had the same kind of look to it, but it just didn't have that same spark to it. I didn't feel nearly as connected with those characters, and to be honest, like, it was still a great game on its own, but it reminded me more of games like Star Ocean than it did Final Fantasy. You didn't really other than the Guardian forces, you didn't really see anything in this game that made you feel like, oh yeah, this is definitely Final Fantasy related. They could have thrown the last Remnant 2 on there, and you would have still been perfectly satisfied. It just felt like your typical Square Enix game.
So you were saying like Final Fantasy 8, this one was with Squall and stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
That it didn't really get very satisfying reviews.
No, because coming after Final Fantasy VII, people expected so much, and so Final Fantasy VIII got a lot less love than what I felt like it should have. But it was definitely not as good as Final Fantasy VII, but it was still a great game. And in the chat, it was really futuristic compared to all the previous titles. And yeah, it kind of was. And I'll speak more about that later because I feel like that futuristic component of it is what caused the downfall in some of their later games.
How
So
do you think it would cause the downfall?
because the thing about Final Fantasy was that was so attractive, at least to me, was that it was just that. It was based in this fantasy world that had dragons and weird things and magic. And then when it started getting into like Final Fantasy 13 for like the Xbox, it took on more feel like you were just playing the Matrix. You were
Oh yeah, I think along the line it starts to get more sci-fi and futuristic.
exactly. It wasn't so much like I don't know. That's kind of like why I got excited when I saw that Final Fantasy the Zodiac Age, was because they brought some of the recognizable enemies back, like the Firebomb and the Moogles and stuff. So
Kupo.
yeah, so I felt like that start of going. Now, one thing about Final Fantasy VIII that did do something that was neat and kind of unique was every once in a while, as part of the story, your main characters would fall asleep, and when they did, it went into this dream world where your three characters were three completely different characters, but they worked for the bad guys.
Oh, holy crap. Wait, which one is this one? Is this still 8?
Yeah, that's Final Fantasy VIII.
Dang, they did some pretty weird different stuff.
Yeah, and while they were
Sounds cool
asleep,
though.
they would be the three that work for, basically the villains. But they were good people. It was kind of showing you like their side and why they're doing what they do. And but what they were really doing um, is there was some kind of weird time travel thing going on there. So that dream that they were having was stuff that happened a long time ago, and they were being shown that by a sorceress who was trying to get them to come to a specific place or whatever, just based on the stuff they were seeing and what they thought was a dream. But it was neat. That kind of stuff was neat. But yeah, they tried to say, okay, well, we did this in the last one. What's some new innovative stuff we can do in this one to separate it? And they did, but it's just really hard. It's like when you put out something that was, I mean, Final Fantasy VII was game changing. There had never been a game like it before, and it was just completely game changing. And it's hard to follow that up. Like, it's like having a great movie, and then they always say that the sequels are worse than the first, because it's like you put out this great movie and it's so hard to come up with a second story that is equivalent to the first one. And I think that's what they ran into. And honestly, a lot of RPGs, even modern RPGs, still sit in that shadow of Final Fantasy VII. Like, here's what Final Fantasy VII did in 1997, and some of the newer RPGs aren't even as creative as that. And it's been, 20 some years. So it's yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And then there was Final Fantasy IX, which, I'll be 100% honest, I've played it like 3 or 4 times. It's probably my least favorite of the series. And that's on me, because there's a lot of people who really like Final Fantasy IX. I just did not connect to the characters at all. The story in the beginning was kind of iffy for me. It was like a theater troupe, and they were acting some stuff out, and then some real stuff goes down. And I don't know. I remember bits and pieces of that game, just because, but that'll tell you that it didn't have that impact like Final Fantasy 7 and 8, because I can 20 years I can still tell you everything that happens in those games, where Final Fantasy 9, it's just I remember running around as a clumsy guard at one point, that, this guy in a full suit of armor, and he runs very weird. That's about all I can remember from that game. I did like that they brought the mages back. um, that was probably the highlight of that game to me, was that you had the little mage that had like the cloak and the little weird hat, and I hadn't seen one of those in a Final Fantasy game since the early Final Fantasy games, like 1 through 3. So it was neat to see them bring a couple of those type of characters back, but I personally was not a big fan of Final Fantasy 9.
All right. Do you happen to remember like who the characters were in it, or
I,
no, because it didn't really resonate?
I honestly don't. I could not tell you. And the thing back then was I never really paid attention to the character names, because I always put my own name in and name the other ones after my friends and stuff. So, but I could name all the characters from Final Fantasy 7 and 8, but I can't name any of them from 9 because I really don't remember. Um, and for a game that I played from start to finish 4 or 5 times, as opposed to like Final Fantasy 7, where I've done that probably 10 or 15 times, um, it's really, I don't know. It just kind of sucks that I don't remember more about it.
I mean, it makes sense because, like you said, it didn't have that impact or more interest to get you to want to remember.
Sure. Well, and then of course that was all on the original PlayStation. So then, of course, Xbox and PlayStation 2 came out, and I ended up going Xbox. But when I heard Final Fantasy X was coming out, I ran out and bought a PlayStation 2, and I played Final Fantasy X. Now, this is the one with Titus. This was probably one of the weirdest Final Fantasies I ever experienced. It had a weird underwater soccer league. It had a bunch of strange things, but I will say this. It also was probably had my first video game crush in it. So, like,
Ooh.
I know it's weird because, like, you play these games and you're like, eh. But I had an actual video game crush on a character called Riku. And she's actually one of the characters that's up on the thing. I tried to put as many of the recognizable characters up on the stream as I could. So I know you can't see it, but the people who are watching. So Riku is the one with the yellow, with the long scarf and the blue bandana. And I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was like her personality or whatever. But she was like my first video game crush. And so I'll give Final Fantasy X credit for that. But I will not give them any respect for Final Fantasy X2 or X2. I did not like that game at all. I felt like that went completely away from what Final Fantasy X was about, and it followed like, I don't know, the girl band. Like,
Yeah, like I didn't have that game for very long before I returned it because it's just like I bought it from GameStop because it was cheap, and it's like, well, I kind of liked the 10 one. Maybe this one I'll like even better. And the freaking beginning of that is so weird, and I have no idea what's going on. And I'm just like, yeah, I guess not.
yeah, and let's see, yeah, YRP, which was basically just the names of the initials for each one of them. Um, but yeah, okay, I love Final Fantasy X. Wasn't the best Final Fantasy game by a long shot, but the themes in the world building was incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Like, there were a lot of things I liked about Final Fantasy X.
And I think of that really cool skill grid system. I really liked that with leveling up characters.
What the
Or
one
something like that.
the one thing that stands out to me that I really didn't like about 10, um, is I felt at one point they tried to steal some stuff from Tomb Raider. There was there was a room you go into and you had to place these little balls of light um, into the spots on the wall, if I'm remembering this correctly. And basically, you had to do that. It was like these puzzles, and I personally did not care for that. I when I play, you know, the turn-based RPGs, I'm not looking for like an action world puzzle game. Like I want to get on with it. It's not a big deal. It wouldn't deter me from ever playing the game again, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't mind. But see, I had such a big issue with the way some of the Tomb Raider games were at the time, and that felt like I was playing Tomb Raider. It didn't feel like I was playing Final Fantasy. It kind of took me out of the moment, you know. Um, so yeah, 10 and 10 too. 10 is definitely worth it, and I think that's why when they sell that as the combo, like you can get the combo on Steam, or even when you get it for like the Vita. I have it for the Vita, and the 10 is the physical copy, and they give you a download code for X2. So they're kind of like, meh, if you want it here, but if not, you don't have to download it. So the Cloister of Trials, that's where Yuna met with the Faith on her pilgrimage. That's correct, yeah. So um, that was my that was my only like major issue with that game. I thought obviously they used Titus and brought him over to Kingdom Hearts, and I still need to play Kingdom Hearts. I don't think I've played any of the Kingdom Hearts games.
I was just gonna say you didn't even play the first one.
Nope. Which is really weird, but I'll tell you why. Like I saw that it was Square Enix and I saw that it was Disney, and that was cool. But when I was doing my research originally a long time ago about Kingdom Hearts and found out that yeah, it's got Final Fantasy characters, but it's not turn-based. It wasn't turn-based Final Fantasy that I was used to, so I never gave it a chance.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, later in life, you know, I want to go back and play them, and eventually I will. I heard they made some HD remakes of those as well, so I might look
I
forward.
believe so.
I might look forward to playing those.
The only thing I can tell you is that if you like it enough to keep going, good luck on following the story. That is my main complaint for the series. I cannot follow it anymore ever since the first one. Because they had the first one and the second one for the main series, but they had like some kind of quote spin-off series, and yet some of their story stuff is canon. So even if you did play like Chain of Memories or whatever the heck it was called for the Game Boy Advance, and you had like a card deck building action game, it was still important information considering the story. And then like freaking, I don't know the name of it, but it was like 1.5 birth something or other. But I think all of the information regarding the story is all canon.
Huh.
I could be wrong.
Well, you know, and with all this in the mix, like, I don't want to forget to mention Final Fantasy Tactics for the first PlayStation, because I personally really liked Final Fantasy Tactics. It was a little bit different. It wasn't story driven really or anything like that, but it still had some cool spells and summons, and I remember buying it for the Game Boy Advance as well. And I remember I would be on my way to work. I would actually leave my house, go to work early, and sit for like an hour in the parking lot before going to work playing Final Fantasy Tactics on the Game Boy Advance, because I did like the game. I just didn't have enough time between work and everything in my home life at the time. So I had to create opportunities, and by going to work early by an hour and sitting in the parking lot gave me that opportunity. But that also brings into another entry into that Final Fantasy stuff there, which was on the GameCube. And I got excited about it when I heard about it. But then when
This is my thing.
but then when I played it,
Oh.
not so much. Final Fantasy: The Crystal Chronicles. Okay.
Yes!
Now see,
All Final Fantasy fans will hate me, but yeah.
you like that game, but I gotta say, like, I coming from what brought me into Final Fantasy, and then putting in Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, I was like, what is this? Like, this isn't. No, this isn't Final
Yeah.
Fantasy. You could have called this like Zelda. Like, this is not. I didn't. I personally, I bought it and didn't even keep it a week, and I just traded it in and tried to forget about it. However, they recently announced that they're going to be doing a Final
A
Fantasy.
remaster in 2019 for the Switch and PlayStation 4.
Yes, a remastered Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, and I'm gonna let you.
It's gonna have voice acting.
I'm gonna let.
Online co-op.
I'm gonna let you go off on that subject in just a second, but I will say that my tolerance for it
How could you?
this time around will probably be a lot higher, simply for the fact that you and I play Final Fantasy Explorers together on the 3DS, and I feel like that's kind of similar to Crystal Chronicles. It's more along the lines of what the game.
Action combat with Final Fantasy as a theme, sort of.
Right. So I'll probably have a little bit more tolerance for it. So we may be playing that one together. But go ahead, tell us about Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, since I missed out on that game.
Well, I can totally understand why, like, since now I know why so many people would, kind of scorn it at first or give it whatever reviews due to, anger or disappointment because they're promised a Final Fantasy game, and then they see this and it's completely different, and there's not really any, like, returning Final Fantasy characters that are established, like Cloud or, whatever, Squall, Yuna, you name it. Um, Instead it was like, an action adventure RPG, but even I could call it an RPG, but there wasn't even traditional leveling per se. The main theme of it was that the whole world was covered in a very deadly miasma, but each town has a crystal that will purify it and protect all around their town. Every year, you're part of a caravan that'll go out into the world in essentially dungeons or fields to explore to find these crystallized trees to get drops of myrrh to fill a chalice with 3 drops of it and then return home for like a cute little party festival thing and then do it again. But every year you'll get new locales to visit and such like that. So you would go into a dungeon or the location, and sometimes along the way on the field map, it would show like a little icon with your caravan. And sometimes along the way, when you hit a crossroad before you, even choose a destination, a little mini event would happen. So I thought that was so cute because it wasn't always linear, I suppose, even though I couldn't explore a huge overworld map in 3D,
Hmm.
stuff would still happen in between with little events, and all these events will be recorded in your diary. So I felt like that made it like they're really trying to make a connection with you. Before I get too far from the home thing, though, also, of course, it had the possibility of co-op at the time, but it was really difficult because you had to get Game Boy Advance and link cables, and it's just a mess. So it was very unlikely it would happen. So if you don't have people with you holding the chalice, a Moogle will fly behind you and hold it for you. Because, of course, as you're exploring with the miasma, that little crystal around the chalice to collect more drops of myrrh, it will protect you from the miasma as you fight. So it's a little bit difficult because you'll have a limited area in which to fight. But it's probably a little bit easier with the Moogle because it'll go a little bit faster, because when you hold the chalice, you walk. The Moogle can kind of fly, and once in a while he'll just need a rest. But yes, back at the hometown, you can actually pick what your family's profession is, and it'll kind of influence what items you could get for them. Sometimes they'll give you a gift by letters. Yes, your family will send you letters, and sometimes you can even respond back to them, and they'll give you the appropriate response depending what, thing you picked. And I think your relationship might go up a higher and they'll say different things. I could be wrong about that, because even though I love this game and replayed it a bunch of times, I don't remember everything. So you could pick like their baker, so you'll get healing items from them, or they're a blacksmith, so they can make special weapons for you. But that really comes into play the best when you do have multiplayer, because that means you all come from the same town, but you have different parents, and you can each go to each of their shops and, prepare and get special things. And sometimes to only get special items, you need ones that are merchants to buy it, to get the iron and the stuff to go to the forge, or to get this. Okay, so yeah, you go. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I'm trying to get as much as I can without going overboard. So yes, when you go to the dungeon or whatnot. You know, go through everything, find secrets, and open treasure chests to find artifacts. And if you can defeat the boss, you get to keep the artifacts you found, or I think they're just added to the choice pool at the end, which is weird, I know, because you don't level, but the artifacts will increase your stats permanently. So you defeat the boss and you get to pick an artifact. I
Okay.
mean, technically the grinding for this is that you do it over and over until there are no more artifacts to pick, and then you move on to the next place.
Huh.
So that is pretty much the main way to do it, and there are 4 races to choose from. I can't remember the names for all of them, but you get to pick your own character, and of course they're mute. There's like humans, which use a sword and a shield. They're pretty balanced. They're okay with magic, and they get a shield to block incoming damage to reduce it. You have another human-like race that kind of wears like fur and leather, and they're more agile. They don't get a block. You can backflip to completely avoid damage. Their basic attack, I think, might be okay, maybe a little bit faster. And their magic was maybe average. The ones after that, I can't remember their name. I think they started with a Y. They're kind of like these lanky bird people, and they wore like metal helmets that sometimes resemble cages on their head, and they had like really big feathery arms. So yeah, they're very odd looking, and they said I think only the very closest people would ever possibly see their faces. But they were very weak physically. They pretty much like poked stuff with a ladle, so they didn't really do basic attacks very well. But since you don't have mana in this game, you find Magicite from enemies that are defeated, like the Cure and the Blizzard and the Fire, and they did the best with magic. Since you don't have mana, instead you just charge it, and then it's ready to use, and you aim it somewhere. So theirs would charge up really fast, and it would be a pretty big advantage for magic. Another thing about magic while I'm on the subject is that with the Magicites, it's kind of rare that you'll find like, you know, Blizzaga or Cura or whatever right off the bat. So most of the time, you would end up combining the magic by aiming the cursor and charging it at the same time, if you have multiplayer on, and then you combine it into a huge effect, and that was really cool. Occasionally, since I was single player, my Moogle would step in to help me, and just because if I could combine 2 Magicites to create Fyra, and then he would do fire sometimes, it would make a huge explosion. I'm like, oh my god, that's so cool. So yeah, there's that. And then the last race, I do remember, I think, are called Lilties. They're little fighter types of characters, and they wear really big iron gauntlets, and they tend to use spears. Their magic is kind of bad. It takes them longer to do it, and they don't deal as much damage, but they're the best with basic attacks. And their defense is pretty good for not having a full-on block. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the basics of it, I think. You know, go out to get the Myrrh 3 times, you go out, get artifacts, and maybe grind a bit. And one thing that was cool when you played single player is that if you did at least have the link cable to just connect your Game Boy Advance, it would actually tell you of like a secret goal for that place you were at, and if you could complete it, you would get a much better artifact than the rest. You could find things that would up your stats by like 2 or 3 instead of just a measly +1.
Right. And didn't it give you like a map or something on the
Yes.
Game Boy Advance screen?
Yeah, I think it did give you a map as well to see where you were going.
Hmm.
And it's funny because as much as I can rave about this game, I had a really rough and stupid start with it. With the very first map, I could not figure out how to continue. At some point, there's nowhere else to go. It's a dead end, and there's a broken bridge. So I'm like, I guess I'll look for like a board or something to repair it. And for a whole week, I couldn't figure it out, and I was gonna return the game. So I ended up buying the freaking guide, because at first I actually just rented this from Blockbuster. So I bought the guide, and I felt like such an idiot, because all you have to do is go down the broken bridge and cross the river.
Oh,
So I'm
wow.
like, oh.
Well, I mean, who
It blended in with the environment and didn't look interactable, so it's like,
Yeah.
I never thought to just climb down the broken bridge.
yeah, who think like when you see something that's broken, like it's natural, and like even playing games recently that, at some point either that bridge is never gonna get fixed, like it's not an area you go to, it's just scene decoration, or
Yeah.
this is something that I have to fix and come to later. Never at any point do you see something broken and think, I can climb that right now.
Yeah. So that was kind of a frustrating start, but the guide ended up helping me anyway, because I ended up buying the game and replaying it a bunch of times.
Nice.
But yeah, I really like the diary entries and that your family will send you letters, because that makes me feel like even though I'm a mute and you think you're not an important character, they kind of make you feel involved in the scenarios this way, especially since once you get to the end, those diary entries actually become a life or death situation for you. You have to, like, I think, answer questions or remember what's happened in certain diary entries to prove you can still remember things.
Hmm.
So for me, I don't care about spoilers. I'm going to say some stuff that happened in the final boss fight, because this might not make any much sense. You're trying to fight for your life at the very end because this, I don't know the significance of it, but apparently it might be linked to the miasma and people suddenly forgetting things, I believe was a problem. Like, even though I love the game, I can't remember all this, but when you're there, there's this light that, like, questions you to make sure that you're not going to become like an empty vessel because your memories are trying to be eaten by the big bad guy. So certain diary entries will come up, and if you get it wrong, they'll summon, super strong monsters that impede your progress to get to them. So anyway, after that, you get through that and you find the big, boss fight. And I got so emotional playing this because I had a ridiculous amount of diary entries because I would grind so much and move back and forth hoping I'll get a diary entry. I probably had over 100.
Hmm.
So when I was fighting that thing, I would see like bubbles of like my family members go towards it, and it would be eating them to like regain its health or something. And I would start to cry. I'm like, no, don't eat my memories of my family. So I'm like crying hysterically as I'm trying to beat it. It's so embarrassing. And as soon as I did beat it, I was doing legit happy tribal dance around the living room.
Is it
So yeah,
sad?
that was an emotional roller coaster for me for that game.
Is it sad that the minute that you said "don't eat my family," the first thing that popped in my head was the Titan eating Aaron Yeager's mom?
Oh, cripes.
Well, they only show it 200 times in that first season, so it's kind
Yeah,
of
you had to show up more, I forgot.
it's kind of burned in there. So, we got about 12 minutes left. So,
Sorry, I might have gone
no,
overboard.
you're fine. I spent a lot of time talking about Final Fantasy VII. So, but they are doing a remake. Is it? Do you know if that's going to be PC or is that like a Switch only or what?
I haven't heard anything about PC. We'll probably have to wait for more news on that, but so far, I believe the only consoles so far have been Switch and PlayStation 4.
Yeah, that would make sense. Except, I mean, because Crystal Chronicles was originally on Nintendo, so that would make sense for it to be on Switch. And Final Fantasy franchise started
It's
on.
usually on the Sony
Right.
systems.
Now, speaking of that, so real quick, I'm going to burn through Final Fantasy 12, which was actually Final Fantasy the Zodiac Age. Great game. If you like the real time action fighting type, it was a great game visually. I have not played it much, so I can't really speak too much on it, but I do plan on actually playing and streaming that game at some point. But Final Fantasy 13. So this is one where me as a person who was primarily an Xbox guy, when I saw, oh shit, Final Fantasy is coming to Xbox. They are bringing out Final Fantasy 13 to Xbox. And I could not have been more disappointed. Like, I wanted a good turn-based RPG. Honestly, there was a game called Enchanted Arms that came out when the Xbox 360 first came out. That was a decent turn-based RPG. I wouldn't say it was great, and it looked really good, as far as graphics and everything. And it was a well-polished game. It just had some weird characters and some questionable scenarios and stuff. It's just weird. But so the thought of a Final Fantasy game coming to the Xbox console was like, I was super excited. And then I got the game. I didn't like it. It was too futuristic. It was too sci-fi. It was
Aw.
just not. It was not the Final Fantasy that I had come to love. And then I think they did a sequel that was called Lightning Strikes or something like that. I think, or Lightning Returns. I think Lightning was apparently one of the characters in the other ones. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't play either one of them. Didn't care. Um, and then Final Fantasy 14, which was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the second time they tried to do an MMO. Um, and then of course they canceled it in like 2012 and then brought it back as Final Fantasy 14: A Realm Reborn. Now their actual first MMO was Final Fantasy 11 Online. I never played it, and it was one of those ones that was kind of hit or miss, and it had somewhat of a fan base, and but then again, not really. Like the hardcore fan base didn't really care, so we just kind of slept on that. Um, but Final Fantasy 14, with it being an MMO, I've watched it. I've watched some of the streams, and the same thing for the new one, Final Fantasy 15 or whatever. I you know how I am about MMOs. Like
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to not have tasks to do. I prefer to just kind of do my own thing or explore or wander around. So with MMOs, between that and the fact that you have other players that interact and grief you and things like that, it just kind of, to me, that ruins my Final Fantasy experience. Like I like to be able to just get on there and ride some chocobos or something, you know. But I don't really care for trying to ride a chocobo and getting cut down by a level 90. Um,
Well, with that one, I don't think there would be a PvP where they could just kill you just because. There's probably PvP battlegrounds that you turn on and
sure,
off if you don't want to participate. And for the most part, so a surprising amount of people solo until they get to like really hard raid dungeons or event dungeons and
sure.
stuff.
Well, that it was just one of those things where I stayed away from the Final Fantasy MMOs. Now there was a lot of like kind of like spin-off games and side games. I know they had Final Fantasy VII snowboarding, which was
What?
okay. So in Final Fantasy VII, there's a stage where you have to snowboard down the side of a mountain, which was really cool because there used to be this game back in the day called Cool Borders that was a snowboard game, kind of like the Tony Hawk type games. And so Final Fantasy took that mechanic and incorporated it into their game. It was actually kind of cool. And but then they actually made a side release game of that. And then Final Fantasy IV, the After Years, which was kind of like an expansion to the original Final Fantasy. It was technically it's a sequel to Final Fantasy IV, but it's still kind of along the same thing. And then, of course, if you had Final Fantasy VII, it came with this side PC game called Chocobo Racing, which was basically just taking the racing part of the game and making it its own game. There were plenty of Final Fantasy Tactics games that came out for PlayStation, PSP, and then, of course, you have all these ones that just started coming out uh, for mobile phones and things like that. Uh, Final Fantasy VII spun off into a movie called Advent Children, which was actually really cool. Final Fantasy, the movie, The Spirits Within, that thing sucked. It had nothing to do with Final Fantasy
Oh,
whatsoever. It
Jesus.
was like a girl in space looking for the last signs of life on a planet. It had nothing to do with like. I was so disappointed. But when Advent Children came out and they brought Cloud and all these recognizable characters and that one was awesome. Um, and I mean, there's been a lot. There's Final Fantasy Type O. They even had Final Fantasy fighting games where it's kind of like Street Fighter, but with Final Fantasy
I
characters.
feel it's called Dissidia.
Yeah,
That's for the Vita or PlayStation Portable.
yeah, I think it was for the PSP. Um, and then, of
Looks
course,
pretty cool.
yeah. So they had all that stuff. They even had Crystal Defenders on mobile phones. It was called Crystal Guardians. Final Fantasy Adventure, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. You just
And they got quite a lot of phone apps for Final Fantasy now too.
Yeah, and that one, what is it, Brave Exvius or whatever? That's actually really good. Like I think I played that on stream on a mobile
Hmm.
phone emulator one time, and it's actually really good. Then there's Final Fantasy Explorers, which you and I play, and we've talked about that before. But the most recent release, and probably one of my favorites in the series since Final Fantasy VIII, I'll say. I like it better than 8 because of, but it's different. It's not your typical Final Fantasy game, but World of Final Fantasy. When this
Yes.
when this got announced, I was excited. I was like, they brought back the writers from Final Fantasy VII. They brought back the developers, and all of a sudden you had super good story, amazing graphics, which for what they
Even though
were,
cheapified at some points.
yeah, even though they were cheapified and somewhat cartoonish, like those worlds were so lush. They brought back all the regular characters that was that you're familiar with from Final Fantasy lore, including your summons or your GFs like Shiva and Ifrit and all these
Mhm.
guys. But they said, let's take Final Fantasy and everything about it and turn it into a Pokemon game.
Mhm.
And so for those of you that
And then
don't,
you were never heard from again.
that's right. So for those of you that don't know, this is how this went down. So my girlfriend here knew how bad I wanted that game. So she tried to tell me a fib in the beginning and say that because I don't have a PS4, I have a Vita. And she said, "Oh, well, they're only making it for PS4." I said, "Okay, okay." So I'm in
Christmas
GameStop. Yeah,
rule.
well, hold on. I'm in GameStop one day buying her Christmas stuff, and I see World of Final Fantasy Day One Edition for the Vita, and she's making faces at me on Discord. So I see Day One Edition for the Vita, and I pick it up thinking that I found something new, rare that even she didn't know about. So after I pay for everything, and I get outside and I send her a message, and I'm like, "Look at what I
Mine showed
found."
up.
I said, "Look at what I found. How awesome is this?" And the next text message I got back was dot 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 dot, and it was like, "No, you have to take it back." And I'm sitting here like, "Uh-oh." Yeah, turns out she had gotten it for me for Christmas, and now I bought it like 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, and now she had to tell me that she bought it because I needed to take it back and get it so that I wouldn't have a duplicate. So it was awesome of her to do that, knowing I just didn't expect it. And I personally thought I was finding something rare because she said it didn't exist. So I was like, oh shit, maybe they changed their mind. So anyway, I turned it back in, and she got me that for Christmas that year, and then I also got it for the PC. So I had it on two platforms, exact same game. There's no benefit of having one on one or the other except for portability, and but I wanted it. I wanted it on both, and if I had a PS4, I probably would have got it on that too. Um, it was it was such a shock. Yeah, and even in the chat, we have a person in chat that says, "I love that game. It was such a surprise." It really was. Like I didn't hear about it that far ahead of time. So by the time they announced it, the game was already almost ready for release, and there was no real hype about it. And I started reading those articles, and it was like Pokemon Final Fantasy style, and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like she got me hooked on Pokemon in the first place. And she created a monster when she did that
Eh.
because I had stayed away from those games for a long time, had no interest in them. And she turned me into a freaking Pokemon maniac. And then I find out that my favorite game of all time, my favorite series, Final Fantasy, is being smashed together with
Pokemon.
Pokemon elements. Come on. So I played it on the Vita. I played it on the computer. I got stuck at the ice maze part. So eventually I will look up a guide and unstick myself and continue playing. But it had everything you could think of. You get little chocobos that are choco chicks that you can raise and evolve into
And
whatever.
ride.
Yeah, and so it's just amazing. And I personally, I would have to say that it's probably my favorite in the Final Fantasy installment since Final Fantasy VII, and I do like eight, and I do think it's a better game than eight. But the only reason I keep eight in there is because it's more of the traditional Final Fantasy versus where this is kind of, in a way, kind of a spin-off, but not really. Like it is, it's definitely its own game, but it's definitely different. Like they worked in something that it's turn based. It's turn based, so that's great. It's got that Pokemon feel. It's got the good story, and of course, back and forth, switching back and forth between your regular size and your chibis, and for some reason stacking all of your things on your head. Um, I really enjoyed it, and it's definitely one of my favorites in those installment.
And in case no one knows, but I'm pretty sure anyone who's a fan of it does know. It's kind of getting a re-release on the Switch, I think. I'm not sure about PlayStation 4 and Xbox 2, but I just know it's for the Switch if you want portability and big screen possibilities. And there will be some slight changes, like you could summon traditional characters or become one temporarily, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I think I saw something about that because I was like, well, what is it different? Because I saw the thing about Sephiroth, and I was like, but you can do that on day one edition. But it might be something different than what I'm thinking. I probably need to look more into it, but I don't have a Nintendo Switch. But this could be not the title because there's a few that have made me consider getting a Nintendo Switch, but that's helping push towards it. But I'm waiting because with the success, I quit.
Here's
I kind of
one sec, this is just what it says.
sure.
An enhanced edition called World of Final Fantasy Maxima will released on November 6, 2018. Will have avatar change to transform into classic Final Fantasy characters. So there you go.
Okay. Well, I mean that's interesting for sure. Now, what I'm gonna wait on is this. I pretty much was really into the Pokemon Go stuff. I haven't really, I've laid off of it quite a bit over the past few months. But when they make World of Final Fantasy Go, I probably start playing. I might have to play that one.
God.
I might have to
Yeah.
play that one.
I might have to too.
So, so yeah. With that being said, man, I thank you guys for joining us, and hopefully you guys had some opinions on this as well. Feel free to go make comments. We'll upload this podcast to YouTube. You can go there and make comments about Final Fantasy, your favorite characters, your favorite installments. Hopefully I don't get yelled at for having a video game crush on Riku later. But I know I'm not the only one out there, by the way.
No shit, Crystal Chronicles for life.
So yeah, anything else you want to add before we say goodbye here?
Just that, since it ended on the World of Final Fantasy, and I didn't really see anything about the PlayStation, but I'm pretty sure it was gonna be on the PlayStation 4 too, because it was originally. Oh, so yeah, it is. But with the Maxima, I just said, I think if you already own it and you have like a save file or whatever, it's actually just gonna be like an update, or it's gonna be like a lot cheaper and like an updated version, something like that.
Oh, that'll be
For
cool.
World of Final Fantasy.
That'll be cool. Well, I'm definitely going to pick up a PS4 at some point because we all know Red Dead Redemption 2 comes out on the 26th of this month. And that is the one game that I'm looking the most forward to. And it better not be what Final Fantasy 8 was to Final Fantasy 7. Final Fantasy.
Please remember to eat, sleep, and breathe.
No way. No way. I am going to be hardcore cowboy for a while. And speaking of that, we're thinking about bringing some guests onto the podcast. So if you guys are interested in hearing us having guests like voice actors, for those of you that don't know, I'm friends with Rob Weedoff, who voiced John Marston in the first Red Dead Redemption, as well as, no, I'm not going to tell you because spoiler. So, and Joe Achman as well, who was the voice of the professor in Red Dead Redemption, and he's also voiced so many things, including Jiminy Cricket in Kingdom Hearts. But he's done everything from voicing Pokemon to Digimon to all kinds of stuff. He's also somebody that we've been considering asking to come on the show. So if you guys would like for us to call in and bring in some special guests, let us know. And we'll definitely look into doing that. I have a lot of friends in the gaming and acting industry that do stuff. If you bring the dude that voiced Jiminy on here, I'd lose my mind. Okay, well, you know what? I will talk to him and find out if he would like to come on a future episode. So anyway, thanks for checking it out, guys. And remember, we're here every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless something changes or if we get hit by another hurricane and don't have power or something, then obviously I'm not going to be on. But for the most part, we're going to try to be here every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And be sure to follow the page on YouTube, as well as give a follow or a like here on Twitch, and it'll notify you whenever we're streaming. So with that, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Okay, bye.